Just make them a quick lunch and run a bath, my mother-in-law barked, bursting into my new home like a hostess who needed no invitations, no requests, no basic respect for other people's boundaries. Behind her, like a noisy avalanche, came 6 children, screaming, laughing, and stamping their little feet, who immediately scattered across the rooms, leaving behind traces of dirt, sticky handprints, and the feeling that the house I had so believed in as the beginning of a new life had instantly turned into a chaotic children's camp. I froze in place, unable to even move, as if my body had ceased to belong to me, my voice had given up, and only my heart pounded loudly in my chest, because somewhere deep down I knew. This wasn't a casual visit, this was an invasion, and it would once again destroy all the fragile walls I'd so carefully tried to erect between myself and their merciless intrusion. "You know what to do, baby," my husband added, giving me that same look of masculine condescension that made my insides clench, and he and his mother burst into loud, almost forced laughter, as if I were a servant in my own home, and their jokes were merely harmless displays of concern. I left without even slamming the door, simply gathering up the last of my dignity and pride, because I understood that if I stayed, I would swallow the humiliation again, accept their rules again, and lose that piece of myself I'd worked so hard to hold on to all these years. And 4 days later, he called in a panic, his voice shaking, as if the ground was slipping from under his feet. "You have to come back, Francesca. Please come back. This is a disaster." And as I listened to these words, I felt that everything inside me no longer resonated with the same tenderness, because for too long I had lived in a world where my feelings and desires were put below the whims of others. My name is Francesca. I'm 42 years old, and I was once a graphic designer, living in color, in form, in search of harmony and beauty. But years filled with endless attempts to maintain balance between my career, marriage, and my fragile inner world have made me a housewife, a woman who decided to give up the struggle for my own dreams for the illusion of peace, for what I called calm, although now I increasingly think I simply gave up. Alves and I have been married for over 10 years, and if you ask him who he is in life, he will, of course, say the marketing director of a small company that produces outdoor gear. But if you ask me, I will answer. First and foremost, he is his mother Beatrice's son, a son to the core, a son until his last breath, a son for whom her word has always been above mine. Early in our marriage, I learned that for him, this wasn't just a relationship between siblings, it was a rule, a law, an immutable truth. If I even questioned it, he'd immediately remind me, "Mom said so," and with that single argument, he'd settle any argument. At first, it seemed insignificant, a trifle, even endearing. Mom would say that onions should never be stored in the refrigerator, and I'd laugh at her kitchen wisdom. Mom believed floors should only be washed with vinegar, not chemicals, and I'd shrug it off, thinking that every woman has her own habits. But with each passing year, I realized more and more clearly, Beatrice wasn't just a mother to him. She lived within our marriage, breathing within our walls, standing between us, even when no one was looking. We moved in close to her, and this became her passport into our lives without restrictions. She'd walk in without knocking, without warning, easily opening the door with her key and cheerfully saying, "Hi, I hope I'm not disturbing you," as if the house belonged to her too, as if my right to privacy was something unnecessary. I could be in the shower, on a Zoom call, at lunch, or simply alone, and still she'd appear, bringing with her the scent of perfume, a loud voice, and endless comments on every little detail of the house. And Alves beamed like a boy, proud that his mother was still there, that his mother was watching, that his mother cared, and every time I tried to explain how I was feeling, he'd repeat condescendingly, "She's just checking in, Francesca. It's from the goodness of her heart." But I knew these weren't checks. These were inspections carefully disguised as concern, and more often, words stuck in my throat that I didn't dare utter. tired of the struggle, of the endless feeling that no one was listening. Christmas was especially hard. She insisted that everyone gather at our place, cousins, uncles, nieces, and of course the children, the endless multitude of children who turned the house into a screaming anthill. "I'll sort it all out," she chirped, dragging into the house bags of frozen pies, a turkey that no one had time to defrost, and a list of side dishes, which ultimately fell on my shoulders, because who else but me, the housewife sitting at home? "You're still home," she said one day, smiling as if she were paying me a compliment, "and you're such a natural-born housewife." And those words, which took my breath away, became a death sentence. A natural-born housewife isn't a woman, not a person, not a designer with dreams and ambitions, but simply a cook, a shadow, a servant. I laughed into my mashed potatoes so no one would see my tears, because it was at moments like these that I was torn apart by longing for my parents, whom I hadn't seen for Christmas in years. And every time I brought up the subject, Alvis would coldly reply, "We have obligations here, Francesca. My family is counting on us." And this "my family" sounded like a death sentence. My life gradually devolved into Zoom calls and missed birthdays for loved ones, empty rooms where bits of our intimacy disappeared one by one, until Alvis and I found ourselves in separate bedrooms, first because of his snoring, then simply because we had nothing left to say to each other, and we became roommates with shared bills and a last name, but no love. I'll continue. Do you want me to write the rest right away, starting with the part about his promotion and buying a house in Golden? A few months ago, Alvis got a promotion, and I remember him uttering the words, "Senior Vice President," with a certain pomp and circumstance, almost boyishly so, as if it were a title he could finally be proud of. And then, with a smug grin, tossing a bottle of champagne into the cart at Whole Foods. I stood there, watching him, trying to decide what I should feel. Joy, pride, relief, or the same old familiar indifference that had become armor over the years. "We should celebrate," he said, as if deciding for both of us. "And what about that house you liked?" I blinked, not quite believing I'd heard it, and clarified, "You mean the one in Golden?" He nodded, and there was something almost tender in his voice. "You deserve it." Golden was 40 minutes from Beatrice, and for him it seemed the perfect distance. Close, yet a little further. For me, 40 minutes was a tiny distance, because I knew she couldn't walk, of course, but her grip was such that no road could stop her. But I still said yes, because at that moment I didn't have the strength to argue, because I wanted to believe in something new, clean, untouched by her presence. The house was bright and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a spacious kitchen, a wraparound terrace, and a real fireplace, by which I immediately imagined myself with a book and a cup of tea. And for several weeks I allowed myself to think that this truly was the beginning of a new chapter, that Beatrice would have no place within these walls, that the clammy-fingered cousins would never get here, that this was our space. I even dared to write to my mother, "We've moved. Maybe you and Dad can come visit us this spring." My heart sank as I pressed send, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of my lost home, the real one. But illusions are never long-lived, especially when you're married to a mama's boy. One Thursday morning, just like any other, he was sitting in the kitchen with a cocktail, casually scrolling through the news. And suddenly, as if casually, he said, "Hey, listen, Mom's coming over on Saturday. She wants to see the new place." I tried to keep my voice even. "It's fine." "Just her?" He paused and turned to the sink, averting his eyes. "Well, she's bringing the kids." I frowned. "What kids?" He shrugged. "Her sister's grandchildren. Maura's twins, Kiara's boys, and 2 more from Deborah. 6 in all." I stared at him, and the words came out in a whisper. "She's raising 6 kids?" But he just shrugged, as if it were nothing. "They're just kids." I felt indignation welling up inside me. She's going to bring 6 kids into a brand new house with cream carpets, glass tables, and an unfinished fence. But he just laughed, as if I was being dramatic. She said not to worry. She'll keep an eye on them. I reminded him of Thanksgiving, when someone flushed half a sandwich down the toilet and we called a plumber, but Alvis just rolled his eyes. Don't overreact. If you don't like it, just stay in your room. I didn't answer. I knew there was no point in arguing. And then Saturday came. It came like a recurring nightmare. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang, and I was still fiddling with the vacuum cleaner when 6 children, screaming and excited, rushed past me like wild animals, and I barely managed to step aside to avoid being knocked over. Beatrice followed them in, dragging 3 backpacks, smiling broadly, as if she were throwing a birthday surprise. Francesca, my dear, this house is absolutely lovely. You've done wonders with the space. Now, and she didn't even give me a chance to speak. The little ones, they're so excited. Make them a quick lunch, and I'll need a bath after. There's dirt from the park on their feet, right? I froze with the vacuum running, the motor still humming, and my fingers trembling. I wasn't planning on having guests today, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Oh, relax, she chuckled. You're always such a planner. You'll figure it out. She turned to the children. Take off your shoes. No, wait, never mind, it's too late. And then Alvis appeared, descending from above, beaming as if this were all a wonderful event. Hey, everyone's here, he said happily. Baby, if this is too much for you, just go outside or, I don't know, do something else. Beatrice grinned. Yeah, Francesca, if you don't like it, go away. And they both laughed, really laughed. At that moment, one of the boys ran down the hallway with chocolate-stained hands. Another tugged the curtain cord, and something in the dining room snapped. But Beatrice didn't even flinch, as if it were natural. I took a deep breath and felt something inside me crack, not instantly, but like a tree that's been bending for years. I turned and went upstairs. In the bedroom, I opened the closet and calmly, without fuss, pulled out my suitcase. I packed a couple of weeks' worth of clothes, grabbed my laptop, my diary, my pills, and my toothbrush. By the time Alvis noticed, I was already zipping up the suitcase. Hey, what's going on? He asked, puzzled. I looked him straight in the eye. You told me to leave. Are you seriously doing this? He chuckled, his voice laced with mockery. Where are you even going? I answered firmly. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere where I'm not an unpaid babysitter, a chef, or your mom's punching bag. He came closer, trying to calm the tension. You're overreacting. Finally, I'm reacting, I said, and Beatrice appeared in the doorway. Francesca, let's not make a scene. Be reasonable, she said, her voice both commanding and pleading. I looked at her. You brought 6 children into my house uninvited and told me to clean up after them. That's a scene, and I'm just leaving. And so I did. I walked out the door. And this time, no one laughed. I didn't cry when I got behind the wheel, though I thought the tears would flow. But there was only peace, silence, and the crunch of gravel under my tires as I drove away from the house I used to call home. I spent my first night in a business-class hotel near the highway. Nothing special. Beige walls, a bed that wasn't mine, and the absence of the scent of Alvis and Beatrice's passive-aggressive remarks. I ordered a salad, barely touched it, and lying fully clothed, scrolled through Airbnb, trying to find a place where I could hide for at least a few weeks before sleep finally overtook me. The next morning, I dialed my parents' number and my mother answered the second time. Francesca. Her voice wavered, the way a mother's voice does when she realizes something is wrong with her child before she even says it. And that simple sound suddenly made me feel a lump in my throat. At first I said nothing, just breathed, heard her breathing in response, and finally exhaled. Can I come home for a while? She didn't ask any questions, didn't demand an explanation, just said, of course, as if she'd been waiting for this for years, as if she knew I'd come back one day anyway. 2 days later, they met me at the Portland train station. My father stood at the end of the platform, arms folded across his chest, just as he had done when he picked me up at college, and the pose conveyed everything: protection, sternness, and a habit of expectation. My mother held her travel mug of mint tea in her purse, clutching it so tightly as if it were the thing that kept her balanced. She hugged me too tightly and too long, and I let her, because in that embrace there was all the tenderness I'd been missing for years. Back at their house, I sat at the kitchen island, watching my father bustle about, making toast I didn't ask for, rearranging chairs that didn't need to be moved, all of it not for the sake of benefit, but to hide his own nervousness. Mom brought me a blanket even though the house was warm, and I immediately understood. This wasn't about keeping me warm, it was about keeping me close, not letting me disappear again. And it worked. After a shower, changing into one of her loose sweatshirts, I finally spoke. Not all at once, but in chunks, like opening a closet door with years of dust behind it. I told her how Beatrice dropped by unannounced, how Alvy's never once took my side, how I felt like an outsider in my own life, how we hadn't vacationed with them in 7 years, how I couldn't remember the last time someone had sincerely asked if I was okay. And then, for the first time, I said it out loud. I'm divorcing him. They didn't gasp, didn't try to convince me to change my mind. Mom simply took my hand in hers, and my father, after a pause, said only one thing. Do you need a lawyer? I nodded, and in that moment I felt like for the first time in a long time I didn't have to justify myself. In the following days, I contacted a lawyer recommended to me by an old college friend. Dana was a woman in her 50s, businesslike and collected, her voice sounding as if she could be both a therapist and a surgeon. She listened patiently and calculated with ruthless precision. She asked for any evidence of Beatrice's interference or Alviz's negligence, and I realized to my surprise that I had plenty. Screenshots of messages from Beatrice. Make sure the sheets are clean before we arrive. The kids have sensitive skin. Shopping lists she'd sent me, dictating dinners without even consulting me. A voice recording from Thanksgiving where Alviz barked, "Just shut up and do what Mommy said." Dana's eyebrows rose. "That's good," she said, and for the first time, I heard in those words not support, but a dry, professional assessment. Good, because it's not just emotion, it's provable. I felt a strange pang of pride, as if I'd passed a test I didn't even know I had. And then the phone rang. It was morning. I was sitting on the back porch, a warm mug of coffee in my hands, the wind rustling the leaves, and suddenly the phone screen flashed a name I hadn't seen in 4 days. Alviz, I let the ringing die down, then again and again. The 5th time, I picked up the phone, not out of pity, but simply to stop the intrusive sound. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. His voice was frantic, halting. "Francesca, for God's sake, I need you. Please come back. This is a disaster." I remained silent. "They trashed the house. The children, you understand? There are crayon drawings on the walls, and the carpets are stained with juice. Beatrice tried to give them a bath and slipped. Nothing serious, but I think she bruised her hip. They broke a coat rack in a mop fight." "Alviz," I interrupted, "why are you telling me all this?" He hesitated, then blurted out, "Because I can't cope. You abandoned me in the middle of the chaos you allowed to happen." I felt a cold clarity rise within me. I abandoned you in the middle of what you allowed to happen. I didn't invite these kids. I didn't give away our house. I didn't laugh in my face and tell me to go away. He was silent. Then he mumbled something unintelligible and added quietly, "I'm sorry." "I really am." I closed my eyes. "I'll be back," I said. "Will you be back?" His voice wavered. "Yes, but only for what I need." "What do you mean?" he asked, and I answered calmly, "I mean, I won't stay. I'm only coming for one thing, your signature on the divorce papers." 5 days later, Dana and I returned to Colorado. Alviz had written that he would be calm and mature, but I knew the value of his promises. Beatrice answered the door. She was wearing a neck brace and said with false warmth, "Oh, darling, it's been a real madhouse here without you. I'm so glad you've finally pulled yourself together. I haven't." Alviz appeared behind her, looking smaller than before, not physically, but as if he'd deflated, like a balloon left out in the cold. We sat in the dining room at the same table where she'd once handed me the Thanksgiving menu on a tablet, and I laid the papers in front of them. Dana sat next to me, her presence cold, sharp as steel. "Are you really doing this?" Alviz said, looking at the papers. "Yes," I replied. "I thought we could handle it." "You didn't even give me a chance to change." I looked at him, then around the house. The stains on the carpet, the faint lines of marker on the wall, the broken cornice. "You told me to leave," I reminded him. "I didn't mean it," he muttered. "You've said that more than once," I replied. He turned to Beatrice, but she only looked at him, and for the first time, her eyes weren't ready with advice. I stood up and, looking at the things still left in the house, realized it would take me no more than 30 minutes to gather everything I needed. A couple of boxes of books, a favorite sweater, some photos I didn't want to leave on public display. I'd stay at a hotel today, and then, back in Portland, I'd begin a new chapter of my life. Alviz nodded silently, as if disheartened, as if he'd only just realized that this was truly the end. As Dana and I walked to the car, she quietly said, "You did well." I exhaled, as if lifting an invisible weight from my shoulders, and replied, "I didn't scream. I didn't cry." A smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Nope," she said. "You got your life back." That evening, back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and saw a letter from Alviz. It contained just one line. I signed them. Attached to the letter were scanned divorce forms with his signature. I sat for a long time in front of the screen, staring at these electronic sheets of paper that suddenly became a symbol of liberation, and finally typed a reply, "Thank you. I wish you peace." Then I closed the laptop and slept more soundly than I had in years, without the usual tension in my body, without anxiety, without the feeling that tomorrow would be another battle for the right to breathe. I never looked back. I never returned to that house, to those things, to the memories that had absorbed disgruntled glances and sly smirks. After Dana submitted the papers and Alviz returned them signed, I let him go. I didn't write to him anymore. I didn't answer Beatrice's call either, although she left a long voicemail that began, "Francesca, I simply don't understand how you could abandon your responsibilities." I didn't need to hear the rest. Let them sort out their own chaos. Back in Portland, I felt life slowly but surely returning to normal. My parents' spare room became my sanctuary. My mother, as if stepping back in time, filled the refrigerator with foods she remembered me loving 10 years ago. Cherry yogurt, almond butter, dark chocolate-covered pretzels. And I let her take care of me the way she always wanted. Every other day, my father would bring printed job postings from the local library and place them neatly on my pillow, as if I were a student again. At first, I just smiled, until one day I read it. It was an ad from a small marketing agency downtown, looking for a creative director for projects with eco-startups and nonprofits. I dusted off my old portfolio, added a couple of projects I'd done for friends, and sent it off on a whim. The answer came that same day. The next day, I was invited to an interview. I put on jeans and a blazer that had been hanging in my closet for years and went there with a feeling I'd long forgotten, a sense of voice. During the interview, I spoke as if I were getting to know myself again, and ultimately I got the job. Returning to work gave me something Alviz could never give, a sense of self-worth. I was no longer someone's wife, a housekeeper, or a woman apologizing for someone else's opinion. I was Francesca Rossi again. I took back my maiden name, and there was something liberating about it, like inhaling after a long-held exhalation. I remembered what it was like to wake up with a desire to create, to solve problems, to see a client's eyes light up with the words, "This is exactly what we need." I rented a small apartment near my parents. 2 rooms, large windows, a balcony barely big enough for a chair, and a potted plant. I painted one wall a deep green and installed a bookcase, which for the first time was entirely mine, free of other people's figurines and rules. Every Saturday I made coffee and went to the farmer's market, choosing produce just for myself. I wasn't recovering, I was starting over. I didn't ask about Alvis, but rumors kept coming. Friends reported that he had changed, become withdrawn, quit his job shortly after the divorce, and moved in with Beatrice in her cramped apartment. The children began visiting less frequently, and the family gradually distanced themselves from her, tired of her control. Ironically, I was the first to leave their endless dinner table. One day, several months later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was our wedding photo and a note. I think you'll find this useful. Sorry it took me so long to understand. T. I stared at the picture for a long time, at the faces that had once represented happiness for others. Then I took the photo out of the frame and burned it on the balcony in a small ceramic bowl. Smoke rose into the sky, like a memory I no longer depended on. On the first anniversary of my passing, I invited my parents over. I made spinach ravioli and lit candles in wine bottles. Mom brought dessert, Dad brought wine and colorful cloth napkins, assuring them they were better than any paper ones. We laughed, discussed plans, work, politics, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself. Not a role, not a function, but a person. Before leaving, Dad hugged me tighter than usual and said, "You've done the hardest part. Most people stay, but you don't." Mom added, "You're finally living life on your own terms. That's all we wanted for you." Sometimes people ask me if I have any regrets about the divorce, about running away, about leaving everything behind. And this is what I answer. I regret waiting so long. I regret the holidays spent with strangers while my parents were alone on the other side of the country. I regret the years I spent trying to be comfortable and quiet for those who never cared about me. But I don't regret leaving. I don't regret packing my bag and refusing to clean up other people's messes. Not in the house, not in my soul. I don't regret choosing silence over screaming, peace over war. And most of all, I don't regret standing up one day, turning the doorknob and saying, "This time I choose myself." And I did. And now I know. I like where I ended up. Did.